The birthday that changed everything. Chapter 1. Perfect Preparations. The smell of vanilla frosting and birthday candles filled the Henderson family's suburban kitchen in Westfield, New Jersey. Sarah wiped flour from her apron as she surveyed her masterpiece. A 3-layer chocolate cake decorated with miniature soccer balls and the number 8 in bright blue frosting. Through the bay window, she could see the backyard transformed into a birthday wonderland. Red, white, and blue streamers hung between the oak trees. A bounce house dominated the lawn, and folding tables groaned under the weight of hot dogs, hamburgers, and all-American party fare. "Mom, when are people coming?" 8-year-old Tommy burst through the sliding glass door, his sandy hair tousled from running around the yard. He wore his favorite Captain America t-shirt, a gift from his father last Christmas. "In about an hour, sweetheart," Sarah smiled, ruffling his hair. "Why don't you go make sure your room is clean? Aunt Jessica's bringing the twins, and you know how they love to explore." Tommy groaned dramatically but trudged upstairs, his sneakers squeaking on the hardwood floors. Sarah chuckled and returned to arranging the vegetable tray, methodically placing cherry tomatoes between cucumber slices and baby carrots. Everything had to be perfect. She'd been planning this party for weeks, coordinating with other soccer moms, ordering decorations online, and even hiring a face painter, a luxury that made her wince when she signed the check, but Tommy had begged. The Henderson house was the epitome of American suburban success, a colonial revival with white clapboard siding, black shutters, and a wraparound porch that Sarah had always dreamed of decorating for Halloween and Christmas. The mortgage was steep, but Mike's promotion to regional sales manager at the pharmaceutical company had made it possible. They were living the dream, the American dream, complete with a golden retriever named Buddy and a minivan in the driveway. Sarah glanced at the clock. 2:30 p.m. Mike should have been home by now. He'd promised to be back from his Saturday morning golf meeting by noon to help set up. She pulled out her iPhone, scrolling through their text thread. His last message, sent at 11 a.m., simply read, "Running late. Start without me." The familiar knot in her stomach tightened. These golf meetings had become increasingly frequent over the past 6 months. Mike claimed they were essential for networking, for climbing the corporate ladder that would secure their family's future. But Sarah had called the country club once, and they'd never heard of any Saturday morning business events. She pushed the thought away, focusing instead on the party checklist taped to the refrigerator. Everything was under control. The coolers were filled with ice and drinks, Coke, Pepsi, and Budweiser for the adults, Capri Sun for the kids. The grill was prepped and ready for Mike to work his magic with the burgers. She'd even bought those fancy artisanal hot dogs from Whole Foods that cost 3 times as much as the regular ones, but Mike insisted they were worth it for special occasions. "Sarah!" Her neighbor, Linda Chen, waved from the back fence. "Need any help? I've got the potato salad ready." "You're a lifesaver," Sarah called back, grateful for Linda's friendship. The Chens had moved in 2 years ago, and despite Mike's initial grumbling about, "There goes the neighborhood," they'd become close friends. Linda was a pediatrician at the local hospital, married to David, a software engineer who worked from home and coached Little League on weekends. As Sarah arranged the last of the decorations, she reflected on how perfect their life looked from the outside. Tommy was thriving in school and soccer. They had a beautiful home in a safe neighborhood. And Mike was successful in his career. She'd given up her job at the marketing firm when Tommy was born, a decision that had seemed right at the time, but sometimes left her feeling isolated and dependent. The doorbell rang, and Sarah's heart jumped with anticipation. The first guests were arriving early, probably her sister Jessica with her twin boys. She smoothed her sundress, checked her reflection in the hallway mirror, and opened the door with a bright smile. But it wasn't Jessica. Chapter 2. Unexpected Guests. Mike stood on the porch, his golf shirt wrinkled and his face flushed. Behind him was a woman Sarah had never seen before. Petite, blonde, and young. Very young. She wore a floral sundress that showed off her tan legs and carried a designer purse that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly grocery budget. "Sarah," Mike said, his voice unnaturally formal. "This is Brittany. Brittany, my wife Sarah." Sarah's smile faltered. "Hi," she managed, extending her hand automatically. Brittany's handshake was firm, her nails perfectly manicured in a shade of pink that matched her lipstick. "Nice to meet you," Brittany said, her voice higher than Sarah expected. "Mike's told me so much about you and Tommy." The words hung in the air like smoke from a barbecue fire. Sarah's mind raced, trying to process what was happening. Why was Mike bringing a strange woman to their son's birthday party? And why did she look so young? "Brittany works in our marketing department," Mike explained, though his eyes didn't meet Sarah's. "I thought it would be nice for her to meet the family." "At Tommy's birthday party?" Sarah's voice was carefully controlled, but she felt her hands trembling slightly. "Dad!" Tommy's voice echoed from upstairs. "You're home. Can we start the grill?" Mike's face softened at the sound of his son's voice. "I'll be right up, buddy," he called, then turned back to Sarah. "We should go inside. The guests will be arriving soon." Sarah stepped aside, her mind reeling. As Brittany walked past, she caught a whiff of expensive perfume, something light and floral that seemed designed to make her feel old and dowdy in comparison. Sarah followed them into the house, watching as Mike's hand briefly touched the small of Brittany's back in a gesture that was far too intimate for a work colleague. The house suddenly felt foreign to Sarah, as if she were seeing it through someone else's eyes. The family photos on the mantel, their wedding picture, Tommy's school portraits, vacation snapshots from Disney World, seemed to mock her with their display of happiness and normalcy. "Wow, this is a beautiful home," Brittany said, her eyes taking in the open floor plan, the granite countertops, and the expensive furnishings that Sarah had carefully selected from Pottery Barn and Crate and Barrel catalogs. So cozy and lived in. There was something in the way she said lived in that made Sarah's cheeks burn. She was acutely aware of Tommy's soccer cleats by the door, the stack of mail on the kitchen counter, and the dog hair on the furniture that she'd been meaning to vacuum. "Tommy's room is upstairs," Mike said to Brittany, as if giving her a tour. "And the master bedroom has a walk-in closet and an ensuite bathroom." Sarah stared at her husband. Was he seriously giving this woman a tour of their house? At their son's birthday party? "Mike," she said quietly, pulling him aside while Brittany examined the family photos. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" They stepped into the laundry room and Sarah closed the door behind them. The small space felt suffocating, filled with the smell of fabric softener and detergent. "What the hell is going on?" Sarah whispered urgently. "Who is this woman? And why did you bring her to Tommy's party?" Mike ran his hands through his hair, a gesture she'd once found endearing, but now seemed calculated. "Look, Sarah, I didn't plan this. She was at the golf course, and when I mentioned Tommy's party, she said she'd love to meet him. She's great with kids." "She was at the golf course." Sarah's voice rose slightly. "Your work colleague just happened to be at your business meeting." "It's not like that," Mike said, but his eyes darted away from hers. "You're being paranoid." The word hit Sarah like a slap. Paranoid. It was what Mike always said when she questioned his increasingly frequent absences, his secretive phone calls, his sudden interest in working out and updating his wardrobe. Before she could respond, the doorbell rang again. This time, it really was Jessica with the twins, followed quickly by a stream of neighbors, soccer parents, and Tommy's classmates. The house filled with the sounds of children laughing, adults chatting, and the general chaos of a suburban birthday party. Sarah threw herself into hostess mode, greeting guests, directing kids to the bounce house, and making sure everyone had drinks. But she was hyper-aware of Brittany's presence, watching as the younger woman chatted easily with the other parents, complimented the decorations, and, most unnervingly, seemed to know details about Tommy's soccer team and school activities that could only have come from Mike. "She seems nice," Linda whispered to Sarah as they stood by the kitchen island, refilling the chip bowls. "Who is she again?" "A work colleague of Mike's," Sarah managed, the words tasting bitter in her mouth. Linda raised an eyebrow but didn't press further. That was one thing Sarah appreciated about her friend. She had a radar for when not to ask questions. Chapter 3. The mask slips. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah watched her husband transform before her eyes. The Mike she'd married, the one who was awkward at parties and preferred watching football to making small talk, had been replaced by someone she barely recognized. He laughed louder, gestured more animatedly, and seemed to gravitate toward wherever Brittany was standing. During the hamburger grilling, a sacred ritual that Mike usually performed with the solemnity of a high priest, he had an audience. Brittany stood beside him, asking questions about his technique and laughing at his jokes. Other dads gathered around, drawn by the unusual sight of Mike actually enjoying himself at a social gathering. "So, Brittany," said Jim Patterson, whose son was on Tommy's soccer team, "how do you know the Hendersons?" "I work with Mike," she replied, flashing that perfect smile. "He talks about his family all the time. I feel like I already know everyone." Sarah felt bile rise in her throat. When was the last time Mike had talked about her to anyone? When was the last time he'd seemed proud of her accomplishments, however small they might be? The cake ceremony approached, and Sarah gathered everyone in the dining room. Tommy sat at the head of the table, wearing a paper crown that Linda's daughter had made for him. His face glowed with happiness as everyone sang "Happy Birthday" in the slightly off-key way that family gatherings always produced. Sarah stood behind her son, her hands on his shoulders, trying to absorb this moment of pure joy before whatever was coming next destroyed it. She could feel Mike watching her from across the room, but when she met his eyes, he looked away quickly. After Tommy blew out the candles and made his wish, the gift opening began. Sarah had carefully organized the presents, saving Mike's for last, a new soccer goal for the backyard that Tommy had been wanting for months. But as Tommy unwrapped the final gift, Mike stood up and cleared his throat. The room gradually quieted, adults shushing children and turning their attention to the head of the household. "Before we continue," Mike said, his voice carrying the authority he used in business meetings, "I have something important to say." Sarah's blood turned to ice. She looked around the room at the expectant faces, neighbors, friends, family members who had known them for years. Tommy looked up at his father with adoration, still wearing his paper crown. "This has been a wonderful party," Mike continued. "And Tommy, buddy, you're growing up to be such an amazing kid. But there's something everyone should know." Sarah wanted to scream, to run, to do anything to stop what was about to happen. But she was frozen, trapped in her own life like an actor in a play she'd never auditioned for. "I've been doing a lot of thinking lately about happiness, about what it means to live authentically. So when the truth is..." Mike's eyes found Brittany's across the room, and she gave him an almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. "The truth is, I found someone who makes me truly happy. Someone who understands me in a way I haven't felt understood in years." The room was dead silent now. Even the children seemed to sense that something momentous was happening. Sarah felt Linda's hand squeeze her arm, an anchor in the storm that was about to break. "Sarah," Mike said, finally looking at his wife, "you're a wonderful mother, and you deserve to be with someone who can love you the way you deserve to be loved. But that person isn't me anymore. I found my soulmate, and I think we both knew this day was coming." Tommy's paper crown slipped sideways as he looked back and forth between his parents, confusion clouding his young face. "Dad, what are you talking about?" Mike's composure cracked slightly. "Tommy, sometimes adults realize they've made mistakes. It doesn't mean we don't love you. It just means things are going to be different." Sarah found her voice at last, though it came out as barely a whisper. "You're doing this now, at Tommy's birthday party in front of everyone?" "I thought," Mike seemed to realize for the first time how this looked. I thought it would be easier to tell everyone at once, like ripping off a Band-Aid. Easier for who? Sarah's voice was getting stronger, fueled by a rage she didn't know she possessed. For you? For your girlfriend? Because I can guarantee it's not easier for your son. Brittany stepped forward then, and Sarah saw her clearly for the first time, not just as a young, pretty woman, but as someone who had been planning this moment, orchestrating it. Sarah, Brittany said, her voice taking on a practiced therapeutic tone, Mike and I never meant for it to happen this way, but when two people connect on such a deep level, it's impossible to ignore. We're soulmates. We found each other and we can't pretend otherwise anymore. The room erupted then. Jessica was on her feet, pulling her twins close and shooting daggers at Mike. Jim Patterson was ushering his family toward the door, muttering something about not in front of the kids. Other guests were gathering their belongings, creating an exodus that turned the celebration into a disaster zone. But through it all, Sarah could only see Tommy. Her 8-year-old son, still wearing his lopsided paper crown, tears streaming down his face as he watched his world implode. Chapter 4. The Aftermath. 20 minutes later, the house was empty except for the Henderson family and the wreckage of what had been a perfect party. Paper plates with half-eaten cake littered the tables, balloons had deflated and lay scattered on the floor, and the bounce house in the backyard sat empty, a deflated monument to childhood joy. Tommy had run to his room and locked the door. Sarah could hear him sobbing through the walls, and each cry felt like a knife in her chest. She stood in the kitchen, still wearing her party dress, staring at the ruins of her carefully planned celebration. Mike and Brittany sat on the living room couch, holding hands like teenagers. The sight made Sarah physically sick. "I think we should talk about logistics," Mike said, his voice taking on that business-like tone again. "Brittany and I have been looking at apartments, and we think it would be best if I moved out this week." "This week?" Sarah turned to face them, her voice incredulous. "You just destroyed your son's birthday party, and you want to move out this week." "Sarah, I know you're upset," Brittany began. "Don't." Sarah held up a hand, her voice deadly quiet. "Don't you dare tell me how I feel. You don't get to speak to me about my family, my marriage, or my son." Brittany recoiled as if she'd been slapped, but Mike put a protective arm around her shoulders. "There's no need to be cruel, Sarah. Brittany's trying to help." "Help?" Sarah laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "She helped you plan this, didn't she? This whole thing, bringing her to the party, making your announcement in front of everyone. This was orchestrated." Mike had the grace to look uncomfortable. "We thought it would be cleaner this way." "Less drawn out." "Less drawn out," Sarah repeated. "Mike, we've been married for 10 years. We have a son together. We own a house, share bank accounts, have built a life. And you thought the clean way to end it was a public humiliation at our child's birthday party." She walked to the mantel and picked up their wedding photo, a younger version of themselves, radiant with hope and promise. In the picture, Mike was looking at her like she was the most beautiful woman in the world. When had that look disappeared? When had she stopped noticing it was gone? "I want you both out of my house," she said quietly. "Now. Sarah, we need to discuss custody arrangements, asset division. Get out." Each word was delivered like a gunshot. "You want to destroy our family? Fine. But you don't get to sit in our living room and discuss the details with your mistress beside you." Mike stood up, his jaw set in that stubborn line Sarah knew so well. "I'll be back for my things tomorrow. And Sarah, this doesn't have to be ugly. We can be adults about this." "Adults?" Sarah's voice rose. "Adults don't blow up their families at birthday parties. Adults don't bring their affairs into their children's lives. Adults don't choose their midlife crisis over their responsibilities." As Mike and Brittany gathered their things and headed for the door, Sarah felt something break inside her chest. Not just her heart, but something deeper. the foundation of who she thought she was, who she thought they were. "Oh, and Mike," she called after them. "Happy anniversary. In case you forgot, it's next month. 11 years. But I guess that doesn't matter when you found your soulmate." The door slammed, and Sarah was alone with the wreckage of her American dream. Chapter 5. Picking Up the Pieces. The next few hours passed in a blur of cleaning and crying. Sarah mechanically threw away paper plates and deflated balloons, packed leftover cake into containers, and tried to restore some order to her home. But every task reminded her of the disaster the day had become. Linda knocked on the door as the sun was setting, carrying a casserole and a bottle of wine. "I didn't know if you'd eaten," she said simply, pulling Sarah into a hug that finally broke the dam. Sarah sobbed against her friend's shoulder, 10 years of suppressed doubts and fears pouring out in a torrent. "I knew," Sarah cried. "Deep down, I knew something was wrong. The late nights, the business trips, the way he'd started working out and buying new clothes. But I told myself I was being paranoid. That's what he always said, that I was paranoid." Linda held her tight, making soothing sounds as Sarah's world collapsed around her. How could he do this to Tommy? Sarah pulled back, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. How could he destroy his son's birthday party? What kind of father does that? "A selfish one," Linda said bluntly. "A man who's thinking with something other than his brain." They went upstairs to check on Tommy, who had finally cried himself to sleep, still wearing his Captain America shirt and his paper crown. Sarah sat on the edge of his bed, smoothing his hair back from his tear-stained face. "He keeps asking me if it's his fault," she whispered to Linda. "If he did something wrong, if that's why Daddy doesn't want to live here anymore." "What did you tell him?" "That sometimes grown-ups make mistakes that have nothing to do with kids. That his dad loves him very much, but sometimes love isn't enough to keep families together." Sarah's voice cracked. "But I don't know if I believe that anymore. If Mike loved Tommy, really loved him, how could he do this?" Linda didn't have an answer for that. And Sarah was grateful she didn't try to offer platitudes about everything happening for a reason. Over the following days, the reality of Sarah's new situation began to sink in. She called a lawyer, a shark-like woman named Patricia Wells, whom Jessica had recommended. Patricia was blunt about Sarah's prospects. "Since you haven't worked in 8 years, you'll likely get alimony, but not forever. The court will expect you to become self-sufficient. As for custody, we'll push for primary physical custody given his abandonment of the family home, but he'll get visitation. The house, that depends on a lot of factors." Sarah left the lawyer's office feeling overwhelmed and terrified. She'd been out of the workforce for so long, she didn't even know what skills she had anymore. Her marketing degree felt ancient, and the thought of competing with younger, more current candidates made her stomach churn. But it was the conversation with Tommy that nearly broke her completely. "Mom, is Dad going to marry that lady?" he asked one evening as they sat at the kitchen table, picking at takeout Chinese food. The formal dining room where they'd held birthday parties and holiday dinners felt too big and empty now. "I don't know, sweetheart. Maybe." Tommy pushed his lo mein around his plate. "Will I have to live with them sometimes?" Sarah's chest tightened. "The judge will decide how much time you spend with Dad, but no matter what happens, you'll always live here with me most of the time." "Good," Tommy said quietly. "I don't like her. She smells funny and she talks to me like I'm a baby." Sarah bit back her own thoughts about Brittany. Whatever her feelings about the woman who had helped destroy her marriage, she couldn't poison Tommy's relationship with his father. The therapist she'd started seeing, Dr. Martinez, recommended by Linda, had been clear about that. "She's important to your dad right now," Sarah said carefully, "and your dad loves you very much. This isn't about you, Tommy. This is about grown-up problems that you didn't cause and can't fix." But as she watched her son struggle with concepts no 8-year-old should have to understand, Sarah felt a rage building inside her that was different from the hurt and betrayal she'd felt initially. This was a cold, focused anger. Not at Mike's affair, but at his selfishness, at his willingness to sacrifice his son's security and happiness for his own immediate gratification. Chapter 6. Revelations. The truth about Mike and Brittany's relationship came out in pieces, like a puzzle Sarah didn't want to complete. It started when Sarah was going through their joint bank account statements, preparing financial documents for the divorce proceedings. There were charges she didn't recognize, restaurants she'd never been to, hotels in cities where Mike had never mentioned business trips, expensive gifts from jewelry stores. The paper trail painted a clear picture of a relationship that had been going on for much longer than Mike had admitted. Then came the revelation from Mike's colleague, Janet Morrison, who called Sarah out of misplaced loyalty and guilt. "Sarah, I don't know if I should be telling you this," Janet said. Her voice strained over the phone. "But I can't sleep at night knowing what I know." "What do you mean?" "Brittany. She's not in marketing. She's an intern in the accounting department. She's 24 years old, fresh out of college. And Sarah, this isn't her first time getting involved with a married man in the company." Sarah felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. "What are you saying?" "She has a pattern. She targets older men with money, married men with established lives." There was Jim Carlson in the Boston office. His wife found out, and it nearly destroyed him financially. Then David Kim in Chicago. The company moved her here when things got messy there. Why didn't anyone warn Mike? Janet was quiet for a moment. Honestly, because Mike seemed willing, happy even, and men like him, they think they're special. They think they're the exception. After Janet hung up, Sarah sat in her empty house, processing this new information. Mike hadn't just cheated on her. He'd been played by someone who made a hobby of breaking up marriages. The thought would have been funny if it weren't so devastating. But the worst revelation came from Tommy himself during one of his weekend visits with Mike and Brittany. "Mom," he said when Mike dropped him off Sunday evening, "Brittany keeps asking me weird questions." Sarah looked up from the bills she was paying, a task that had become both more urgent and more depressing since she was now managing on half the income. "What kind of questions?" "Like about our house, about how much money you spend on groceries and stuff. And she asked me if you have any boyfriends." Sarah's pen stopped moving across the check she was writing. "She asked you if I have boyfriends?" "Yeah, and she asked if you seemed sad, or if you talked about Dad when he wasn't around, and she wanted to know if you've been looking for a job." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Brittany wasn't just a homewrecker. She was conducting reconnaissance, gathering information that could be used against Sarah in the divorce proceedings. "Tommy," Sarah said carefully, "from now on, if Brittany asks you questions about our life here at home, I want you to tell her that Mom says family business should stay in the family. Can you remember that?" Tommy nodded solemnly, but Sarah could see the confusion in his eyes. He was being forced to navigate adult politics at an age when he should be worried about nothing more complicated than his spelling tests and soccer games. That night, after Tommy was asleep, Sarah called Patricia Wells. "She's coaching him," Patricia said after Sarah explained the situation. "It's not uncommon, but it's definitely something we can use. Document everything, times, dates, specific questions. And Sarah, you might want to consider requesting supervised visitation until this settles down." "Can I do that?" "Given that he's exposing Tommy to someone who's actively working against you, and given the instability of his living situation, absolutely. We can argue that it's not in Tommy's best interest to be in that environment right now." For the first time since the birthday party disaster, Sarah felt like she had some power back. She wasn't just a victim of Mike's midlife crisis, she was a mother protecting her child. Chapter 7. Fighting Back. The divorce proceedings became a war zone, but Sarah was no longer fighting just for her own survival. She was fighting for Tommy's future, and that gave her a strength she didn't know she possessed. Mike had moved into a trendy apartment downtown with Brittany, complete with exposed brick walls and a view of the city skyline. It was the kind of place a 24-year-old would love, but that lacked the suburban comforts an 8-year-old needed. There was no yard for Tommy to play in, no dedicated space for his toys and books, and certainly no room for a dog. He's trying to make his new life look exciting compared to our boring suburban existence, Sarah told Dr. Martinez during one of their sessions. But Tommy isn't impressed by exposed brick and trendy restaurants. He wants stability, routine, his own room. How is Tommy handling the transition? Sarah sighed. Some days he's angry, throwing tantrums, acting out at school. Other days he's sad and clingy. But the worst days are when he tries to be the man of the house, telling me he'll take care of me and that he doesn't need his dad. No 8-year-old should have to feel responsible for his mother's emotional well-being. Dr. Martinez nodded. Have you considered family therapy? Sometimes it helps children to have a neutral space to express their feelings about divorce. Mike won't agree to it. He says Tommy is adapting fine and that therapy would just confuse him more. But Tommy isn't adapting fine. His grades are slipping, he's having nightmares, and he doesn't want to play soccer anymore. He says it reminds him too much of when Dad used to come to his games. The court-ordered custody evaluation was scheduled for the following month, and Sarah was determined to present the strongest case possible. She documented everything: Tommy's declining grades, his behavioral changes, the inappropriate questioning from Brittany, Mike's inconsistent visitation schedule when his new relationship took precedence. But she also focused on building a positive future for herself and Tommy. She enrolled in a refresher course for marketing professionals, updating her skills and learning about digital marketing and social media, concepts that hadn't existed when she'd left the workforce. It was challenging, balancing coursework with single parenting and divorce proceedings, but it felt good to use her brain in ways she'd forgotten she could. Linda became Sarah's unofficial co-parent, picking up Tommy from school when Sarah had class, hosting playdates when Sarah needed to meet with lawyers, and providing the kind of friendship that reminded Sarah she was more than just Mike's discarded wife. "You're different," Linda observed one evening as they sat on Sarah's back porch, watching their kids play in the yard. "Stronger, maybe. More yourself." Sarah considered this. "I think I'd forgotten who I was outside of being Mike's wife and Tommy's mom. Don't get me wrong, I love being Tommy's mom, but I'd lost Sarah somewhere along the way." "Mike's loss," Linda said firmly. "Any man who would choose a 24-year-old opportunist over the woman who built a life with him is an idiot." "The thing is," Sarah said, "I don't even miss him anymore. I miss the idea of him, the family we were supposed to be. But the real Mike, the one who could humiliate his son at his own birthday party, I don't want that man back." Chapter 8, New Beginnings. 6 months after the birthday party disaster, Sarah's life looked completely different. The divorce was finalized, with Sarah retaining primary custody of Tommy and the family home. Mike was ordered to pay both child support and alimony, though Patricia had warned that the alimony wouldn't last forever. Sarah had landed a part-time marketing position with a local nonprofit. Not glamorous work, but it felt good to use her skills for a cause she believed in, and the flexible schedule allowed her to be present for Tommy's needs. Most importantly, Tommy was starting to heal. The family therapy sessions, which Sarah had initiated without Mike's agreement, were helping him process his feelings about the divorce. He'd rejoined his soccer team and was making new friends whose parents were part of Sarah's expanding support network. Mike's relationship with Brittany was already showing signs of strain. According to Janet Morrison, who kept Sarah informed out of a mixture of friendship and gossip, Brittany had been pushing Mike to propose. But Mike seemed to be having second thoughts about his impulsive choices. "She's pressing him to buy a house in the suburbs," Janet reported during one of their coffee dates. "She wants to play house, have the whole domestic fantasy, but Mike's realizing that what he thought was love might have just been infatuation with feeling young again." Sarah found she didn't care as much as she thought she would. Mike's happiness or unhappiness was no longer her responsibility. Her energy was focused on building a new life for herself and Tommy. The custody arrangement meant Tommy spent alternate weekends and one evening per week with Mike, but increasingly those visits were shortened or canceled when Mike's new life proved less appealing than he'd imagined. Tommy didn't seem to mind. He'd found stability and security in his routine with Sarah, and Mike's inconsistency only reinforced that his mom was the reliable parent. One evening, as Sarah was tucking Tommy into bed, he asked the question she'd been dreading. "Mom, do you think you'll ever get married again?" Sarah smoothed his hair back from his forehead, a gesture that had become their nightly ritual. "I don't know, sweetheart. Maybe someday if I meet someone really special, but right now I'm happy with just you and me. We make a pretty good team, don't we?" Tommy nodded. "Yeah. And Mom, if you do meet someone, I hope he likes soccer. And I hope he's not mean to you like Dad was." Sarah's heart clenched. She hadn't realized Tommy had perceived Mike's behavior toward her as mean, but children saw more than adults gave them credit for. "Your dad wasn't mean, honey. He was just confused. Sometimes adults make mistakes when they're trying to figure out what makes them happy." "Yeah, but you didn't make mistakes. You just took care of everyone." Out of the mouths of babes. Sarah kissed his forehead and turned out the light. But Tommy's words stayed with her as she went downstairs to her empty living room. For the first time in months, Sarah allowed herself to imagine what her future might look like. Not just the immediate future of getting through the divorce and establishing their new normal, but the long-term future. Would she remarry someday? Would Tommy have siblings? Would they stay in this house with its memories of both happiness and heartbreak? She didn't have answers to these questions. And for the first time in her adult life, that felt okay. She was 38 years old, starting over, and while that was terrifying, it was also liberating. She got to choose what came next. Chapter 9, Full Circle. A year later, Sarah was hosting Tommy's 9th birthday party. This time, the guest list was smaller but more authentic. Kids from school whose parents had become genuine friends, Linda's family, Jessica and the twins, and a few of Sarah's colleagues from work. The theme was pirates, Tommy's current obsession, and Sarah had transformed the backyard into a Caribbean adventure. She'd made the cake herself again, a ship-shaped creation with chocolate water and gummy fish swimming around the edges. It wasn't as Pinterest perfect as some of her previous creations, but Tommy had helped decorate it, and his fingerprints in the frosting made it more beautiful than any professional cake could have been. Mike showed up for the party, as scheduled, but came alone. Brittany, according to Tommy, had moved away to find herself, which Sarah interpreted as the inevitable end of an unsustainable relationship. Mike looked older, more tired than she remembered, and there was something subdued about him that was both sad and satisfying. "Nice party," he said to Sarah as she refilled the lemonade pitcher. "Thanks," she replied neutrally. They'd developed a cordial but distant relationship that worked for co-parenting purposes. Mike started, then stopped, seeming to struggle with his words. "I wanted to apologize for how I handled things, for the birthday party last year, for putting Tommy through all of this." Sarah continued pouring lemonade, not meeting his eyes. "It's a little late for apologies, Mike. I know it is. But I need you to know that I realize now what I threw away, what I destroyed." Sarah finally looked at him, seeing not the confident man who had blown up their family, but someone who looked genuinely broken. "Mike, we can't go backwards. Too much has happened." "I'm not asking to go backwards," he said quickly. I see what you've built here, how strong you've become, how happy Tommy is. And I know I have no right to feel this way, but I'm proud of you. And I'm sorry it took me losing everything to realize what I had." Before Sarah could respond, Tommy ran up to them, his pirate hat askew and his face painted with a skull and crossbones. "Dad, did you see my treasure map? Mom helped me make it, and it leads all around the yard." Tommy grabbed Mike's hand, pulling him toward the elaborate treasure hunt Sarah had set up. Sarah watched them go, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Mike was trying to be present for Tommy now, but it felt like too little, too late. The damage had been done, and while Tommy was resilient, he'd learned some hard lessons about trust and stability. As the party wound down and guests began to leave, Sarah found herself cleaning up with the same systematic efficiency she'd developed the year before. But this time, there was no dread, no waiting for the other shoe to drop. This was her party, in her home, celebrating her son's happiness. Linda stayed behind to help, as she always did. "He looks miserable," Linda observed, nodding toward Mike, who was helping Tommy put away the pirate decorations. "He made his choices," Sarah replied, but without the bitterness that would have colored her words a few months earlier. "Any regrets?" Linda asked. Sarah considered the question as she scraped chocolate cake from paper plates. "About the marriage ending? No. About how it ended? Of course. Tommy didn't deserve to have his childhood disrupted like that, but the marriage itself, I think it was over long before Mike met Brittany. We were just going through the motions, both of us too afraid to admit we'd grown apart. And now?" Sarah smiled, the first genuine smile she'd worn all day. "Now I'm writing my own story instead of just being a character in someone else's." Chapter 10. Lessons Learned. 2 years after the birthday party that changed everything, Sarah stood in her kitchen, preparing for another celebration, this time her own. She'd been offered a full-time position as marketing director at the nonprofit, a role that would provide financial security and professional fulfillment. Tommy, now 10 and showing signs of the teenager he'd soon become, sat at the kitchen counter doing homework. He'd grown taller in the past year, losing some of the little boy softness that had made Sarah want to protect him from the world. He was becoming his own person, with opinions and interests that sometimes surprised her. "Mom, can I ask you something?" he said, looking up from his math worksheet. "Always." "Do you think Dad is happy?" It was a question Sarah had been expecting but still found difficult to answer. Mike's life had stabilized somewhat. He'd moved to a smaller apartment, closer to their neighborhood, and had been more consistent with his visitation schedule. But there was a loneliness about him that even Tommy had noticed. "I think your dad is figuring out what happiness means for him," Sarah said carefully. "Sometimes adults have to make mistakes to learn important lessons." "Like what?" Sarah sat down across from him, pushing aside the mail she'd been sorting. "Like the difference between what makes you feel good right now and what makes you happy in the long run. Like understanding that real love isn't just excitement and butterflies, it's also commitment and partnership and choosing to show up every day, even when it's hard." Tommy nodded thoughtfully. "Is that why you don't want to get married again? Because you want to make sure it's the real kind of love?" Sarah was constantly amazed by her son's insight. "Partly, yes. But also, because I've learned that I can be happy on my own. I don't need someone else to complete me. I'm already complete. If I ever do get married again, it'll be because I want to share my complete life with someone, not because I need them to make me whole." It was a lesson she'd learned the hard way, but it was perhaps the most valuable thing to come out of her divorce. The woman who had stood in this same kitchen 2 years ago, desperately trying to hold together a family that was already broken, had been dependent on others for her identity and self-worth. The woman she was now had learned to find both within herself. The doorbell rang, interrupting her thoughts. Tommy jumped up to answer it, returning with Linda and a bottle of champagne. "I thought we should celebrate your promotion properly," Linda announced, pulling Sarah into a hug. As they opened the champagne and toasted Sarah's success, she reflected on how much her definition of celebration had changed. 2 years ago, a successful party meant everything looked perfect and everyone else was happy. Now, celebration meant acknowledging her own accomplishments and sharing genuine joy with people who truly cared about her. "Speech!" Linda called out, raising her glass. Sarah laughed but obliged, looking around her kitchen. the heart of the home she'd fought to keep, the place where she'd cried and planned and rebuilt her life. 2 years ago, she began, I thought my life was over. I thought I was nothing without my marriage, without the role I'd been playing for so long that I'd forgotten it was just a role. But I've learned that sometimes the worst thing that can happen to you is also the beginning of the best thing that can happen to you. She looked at Tommy, who was pretending to be embarrassed by his mother's sentimentality but was clearly listening intently. I've learned that I'm stronger than I thought, that I can build a life on my own terms, and that being a single parent doesn't mean being a lesser parent. I've learned that friendship like Linda's is worth more than any marriage that makes you feel small. And I've learned that my son is the most resilient, wise, wonderful person I know, and that he deserves a mother who models strength and self-respect. Tommy rolled his eyes but smiled, and Sarah could see pride in his expression. So here's to new beginnings, second chances, and writing our own stories, she concluded, raising her glass. As they clinked glasses and laughed, Sarah felt a deep sense of contentment. Her life didn't look anything like the American dream she'd once pursued. The perfect house, perfect marriage, perfect family photos. But it was authentically hers, built on a foundation of self-reliance, genuine relationships, and hard-won wisdom. Epilogue: The birthday that saved everything. 5 years after the birthday party disaster, Sarah was preparing for Tommy's 13th birthday. This time, the celebration would be different. Tommy had requested a small gathering with just his closest friends, followed by a family dinner with Mike included. The relationship between Sarah and Mike had evolved into something neither of them had expected, a functional co-parenting partnership built on mutual respect for what they'd created together, even if they couldn't sustain it as a couple. Mike had done the work of examining his choices and their consequences, attending therapy and making genuine efforts to rebuild his relationship with Tommy. Sarah had started dating someone, David, a fellow single parent she'd met through Tommy's school. Their relationship was built on friendship first, shared values, and a mutual understanding of the complexities of blended families. It was nothing like the passionate intensity of her early relationship with Mike, but it was steady, supportive, and genuine. Tommy had grown into a thoughtful teenager who moved easily between his parents' worlds, secure in the knowledge that both loved him, even if they couldn't love each other. The trauma of that long-ago birthday party had become part of his story, but not the defining part. He'd learned resilience, adaptability, and the importance of authentic relationships. As Sarah lit the candles on Tommy's birthday cake, a simple chocolate sheet cake he'd specifically requested, she thought about the woman she'd been 5 years ago. That woman had been so afraid of imperfection, so invested in appearances, so dependent on others for validation. The birthday party disaster had been devastating, but it had also been liberating. Sometimes, Sarah reflected, the worst thing that happens to you forces you to discover the best version of yourself. The birthday party that had destroyed her old life had ultimately saved her from a future of quiet desperation and unfulfilled potential. Tommy blew out his candles and made his wish for a good year ahead, for his parents to stay happy and healthy, and for his favorite soccer team to finally win the championship. Simple wishes from a boy who had learned not to take family stability for granted, but who had also learned that families could take many different forms and still be sources of love and strength. As the small group sang Happy Birthday, slightly off-key as family gatherings always were, Sarah felt a profound sense of gratitude, not for the pain she'd endured, but for the strength she'd discovered, the relationships she'd built, and the life she'd created from the ashes of her old dreams. The American dream she lived now wasn't the one she'd originally pursued, but it was better because it was real. It was built on authentic connections, personal growth, and the knowledge that she could survive anything life threw at her. And as she watched her son laugh with his friends, saw Mike actually enjoying himself without trying to prove anything to anyone, and felt David's reassuring presence beside her. She knew that sometimes the most beautiful stories are the ones that begin with, "Everything fell apart, but then..." The birthday that had changed everything had, in the end, changed everything for the better, and that was worth celebrating.